to brainstorm and report back on what we heard and what we can and how we can move forward. This is again to practice a collaborative, transparent, shared leadership model, saying it one more time, as I step down as chair. Before all that though, I am so pleased to give the floor to Devin, who will start by reminding us of all the good work we did together for this last CSW 67 to bring our thoughts into focus on who we are and what we've achieved. So I think, Devin, you're going to do that from, okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. There's just one thing. Okay. I can be an assistant.
Okay. Hi, pals. All right, so we have two big announcements, kinda. So the first is that the NGO CSW 67 forum report is now available. So you can type in the link. So I will put the link in the chat for those of you on Zoom. And also if you wanted to look at it now, you can type in the link in your phone, but it's also on our website in a bunch of different places. Should be pretty easy to find. And so this is the third year that I think we're doing this forum report. So you probably already kind of know what it entails from previous years, but essentially it gives a recap of the forum program, all the events that happened, the different aspects of the forum, and it also talks about our planning process for all those different aspects, how we do what we do, some of the outcomes of the forum, what it delivered, and also some ideas we have and some reflections in how we want to move forward and plan for future forums. And yeah, like I said, I'll put the link in the chat, and it's also on our website in a bunch of different places. And the second project I wanted to share was the history of NGO CSW New York. So this is a big exciting project for us because up until now, we haven't really had a comprehensive history of the 50 years that we've been working. So as you might know, last year, 2022 was our 50th anniversary. So that's where this project was born. So yeah, so we just want to capture the narrative of the history itself, how it connected and coincided with the different, feminist and women's history movements and moments happening globally, but also specifically at the UN. And each chapter is actually represented by a former chair, written in their own words for the most part. So it's also kind of nice. Each chapter is in the voice of each chair, and they go over some of their experiences, some of the challenge and successes, and some of the significant moments that were happening during their time. Yeah, so it's not yet finalized. We're getting really close, but we wanted to let you all know that it's coming soon, and it will be published this summer at some point. So just keep an eye out for it. And shout out to Susan, Ivy, and Rosa for being on our little working group for it and working so hard on this. And yeah, that's it for me. And I'll put the links in the chat for people on Zoom. Yeah, and if you have any questions, let us know later. So next, we're gonna hear from Fotani about the independent review of the UN's gender architecture. Okay.
So thank you, Devin, Huri, Ivy, everyone, for the opportunity to be here with you today and discuss the review of the UN's capacity to deliver on gender equality. My name is Fotini Papayotti, and I am a senior policy advisor with ICRW, working on our feminist foreign and development policy portfolios and the global and multilateral gender architecture, with a focus on financial commitments and accountability mechanisms. And in the past, I will try, yes. In the past, I have done research on senior level appointments in the UN and gender parity more broadly in the UN. So that has given me an in-depth understanding of some parts of the UN's work on gender equality more broadly. So ICRW has also been leading the Feminist UN campaign since 2017, when the current Secretary General was selected. And this campaign has brought together advocates and experts to develop a feminist agenda for the SG and evaluate his performance against that agenda in annual report cards. You can find them on our website. And in 2021, after he was reelected for his second term, we decided to put the assessment on pause because we heard of the gender architecture review that was going on internally at the UN at the time. So the Secretary General committed to this gender architecture review in his report called Our Common Agenda, where he kind of outlined a broader set of reforms for the multilateral system. And at first, when we heard about this review, we were kind of cautiously optimistic that at last we will get a full mapping of capacity and resources for gender equality in the system, and concrete examples of what has worked and could be scaled up or replicated in other entities and parts of the system. We were also envisioning a stronger role for feminist civil society in the process, but we were quickly disillusioned, may I say, since the selection process was not competitive for the advisors that eventually took on the review. There was no transparency on the criteria for selecting the reviewers team and the advisory board. And it appears that after some initial consultations with feminist civil society, the findings and the recommendations of this review were not then validated with feminists and with the communities that those outcomes would mostly affect. There were also delays in the process and kind of a rather secretive and selective approach to disseminating the report that came out of the review. And that also tended to fuel some speculation and around the content and the overall goals of this review. And of course, adding to frustration over a general pattern of limited engagement with civil society, particularly feminist civil society. From what we have seen a copy of the review, and the review identifies 5 key challenges for the system. There is a lack of common and well-accepted definition of gender equality, and the UN generally tends to focus on inclusion for women and girls rather than transformation. Second, there's a conclusion that mainstreaming has been largely ineffective in the system. It has been limited to some small, marginalized, so-called gender spaces that operate with limited resources and what the review terms a scarcity mindset, quote unquote. There's uneven leadership and accountability, a patriarchal organizational culture and policies, and power dynamics with and between member states. So it is clear, and we agree with that as the review concludes, that the system must change to accelerate progress. However, there are some contradictions and gaps in the review's analysis and methodology that cast doubts on the validity and the feasibility of the recommendations, and then overall, the overall goals of the review itself. First and foremost, we find that this review does not really challenge power where it lies in the system, but focuses on some of the actors that have the least power to bring about that change that is envisioned. For example, it either completely overlooks persistent obstacles like the influence of member states over budgets, over mandates, over appointments that kind of cripple resources and capacity for gender equality across the system. Or it does discuss weak leadership and accountability, but then fails to match that analysis with robust recommendations to address the specific issues that could have a big impact on and a bigger change. So it is then particularly jarring to see that while leadership is discussed in very broad and weak terms, there's a very specific undermining tone reserved for those actors in the system, the gender champions in the system, that achieve a lot with very little. And then a very intentional focus on their differences and their grievances instead of their successful joint work and programming. So there's both very few corrective measures for underperforming leaders, and also even fewer rewards and incentives for those who achieve the most with like very little in the system. So then the proposed recommendations, there's a gap between the analysis and the recommendations, and also the recommendations failed to meet even some of the criteria that the review itself has identified as goals for these recommendations. So they often replicate some very top-heavy bureaucratic approaches that we know have been used in the past and have had at best mixed results. They do not outline why we need to do this again and what would be different this time to make the same approaches succeed. Or they have been put forward in the past and rejected either by the General Assembly or by the Secretary General himself. They often require some very cumbersome, approval procedures like endorsement by the General Assembly or the Fifth Committee, and possibly the Security Council. And we know that this is going to be an uphill struggle. Or often they appear very unrealistic or politically naive, especially when they discuss funding and resourcing for the proposed changes. It is very, very unclear how they suggest that these recommendations will be taken to and approved by member states. For example, funding new gender units for each entity in the UN system is, considering the current context, is rather unlikely to happen. So this is particularly relevant in the proposed changes to UN Women's role. So first of all, the review suggests that UN Women has the power and capacity and responsibility to hold both the system and all member states accountable for gender equality. And that this was in fact the original feminist vision for the establishment of UN Women. Again, this appears highly unrealistic. We know the challenges with working with member states to promote gender equality goals. We know that even more powerful actors in the system, like the Secretary General himself, often struggle with this. So to then put this on UN Women, one of the youngest, most under-resourced entities in the system, does not guarantee success, I would say. And then, as mentioned before, there is this focus on exacerbating tensions and divisions between UN Women and other entities in the system who also work on gender equality. There is very little effort throughout to identify what is their unique value, what do partners value in each one of these entities, and then based on that, to propose a model of co-creation and collaboration that will play to their respective strengths rather than trying to tear them apart and break them down. There is a proposed levy on all UN entities to finance UN Women's Coordination Mandate, which then will enable all other entities to review UN Women's performance on coordination. This particular recommendation can be very cumbersome for entities with smaller budgets. It can reduce UN Women to a bill collector role, trying to get that funding from other entities. And from what we've seen with past efforts at strengthening coordination, it can really open up space for attacks on UN Women, and the role of coordination in the system is generally not appreciated by other entities. Entities do want to maintain a certain level of independence and do not want to be told by other sister entities what it is that they should be doing. And then the biggest, perhaps, and most difficult to understand recommendation is the focus on insisting that UN Women must cease its in-country operational activities in order to strengthen its coordination and normative mandates. So it's not clear why one has to be reduced for the other to improve. And then it is very clear that especially this particular recommendation has not been validated with any of the partners and the communities that would be affected. Because even knowing the challenges with working with UN Women, often, especially in the country level, the reality and the truth is that partners value both the support UN Women provides and also the feminist analysis that underpins its work at the country level and globally at the normative level. So now going to the implications of this review and the potential impact of it, I think there are some real risks with it, both within the UN system and for gender equality more broadly. Internally, it could very likely be used to justify budget cuts. And the review itself mentions that staff members have raised this as an issue, but does not really engage with this concern that staff members have expressed, just mentions it, but there's no further analysis. Or, that can embolden attacks saying, well, gender mainstreaming has failed. Why are we even doing this? Why are we dedicating scarce resources and funding to something that clearly and now, with proof doesn't work? So it will certainly exacerbate existing tensions among gender champions, perhaps pit UN Women against other entities, especially in the field. Externally, it kind of risks perhaps spreading or creating an image of the UN as fumbling on gender equality, not being able to be the facilitative partner to global gender equality advocates that we were hoping the organization would be, creating this image of the UN as having little to show for all these investments that have been made and all these efforts that have been made to advance gender equality. And that could then have downstream effects on undermining global norms and their application or standards on gender equality and human rights more broadly. And then the recommendation to develop a new definition for gender equality that the UN then will apply to its work is the one that I personally find rather risky in the current context, because first of all, there has been hard-won progress articulating clear standards. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action with CSW, agreed conclusions, and CEDAW. So many instruments have very strong language and a definition on what constitutes gender equality. But then even to take this on will add 3 years of, bureaucratic processes trying to come up with new words for something that we already know what it is. But more seriously, it opens up the space for member states and other actors to challenge and reject all these existing international standards and say, well, now is the time to discuss what gender equality is, and our vision of an understanding of what gender equality is and should be in those new standards or definitions or whatever it is that comes out of this. And I feel that in the current geopolitical climate and context, this is a very concerning discussion to have, an endeavor with very unpredictable, but possibly very profound outcomes. So for those partners in civil society who have had access to the report, because as I mentioned, unfortunately, not everyone has had the opportunity to do that. It is no surprise then that we are very concerned about this review, frustrated with a lack of transparency. And on the other side, the review has sent a jolt through UN Women. Staff and leadership we know are working together to address the recommendations pertaining to their entity. We do know that there are internal discussions and conversations happening on the review and its recommendations. So this is why in the op-ed we call again on the Secretary General and his team to officially launch the report and open up a dialogue that is truly inclusive with a special focus on the communities, particularly in the Global South, that will be most directly affected by the outcomes of this review. And you know, as feminists, we have grappled with many of the same issues in our own institutions or while studying large international complex organizations. We may not have all the answers all the time on what constitutes transformation, but we have feedback. We have experience that we can bring to this discussion. We value the UN system. This is not about just critiquing the UN system. We do see the UN as a facilitative partner to gender equality advocates everywhere, and we hope that our call will be taken up for meaningful engagement in this process as it moves forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm supposed to just introduce Joanne, but I'm going to use my chair power to make two comments. The first thing I want to say is that I'm very grateful for our feminist friends who reach out to us and give us heads up and, you know, that shared this document with us. And then we actually did reach out to the DSG office and we heard back from them. We invited them. They were not able to come today, but they said that they will continue the conversation with us and hopefully we can have a public conversation with them, right? And also we got permission to share the document that's not supposed to be public. I mean, that's always a fine line, right? We're like, this is not a secret. We're not breaking any rules or laws. I wanted to clarify that. The other thing I wanted to say is that, of course, I didn't know what your speech was going to be. I read your Pass Blue article, but I want to clarify that this is not to defend UN Women. We as partners of UN Women, we've been critical and we are still critical and we work with them and, you know, to improve what it is they're doing. They are only 12 years old. They are the least, you pointed that out. So we know their capacity is what it is. So it's not just to protect UN Women, especially even on the ground level. Having said that, it's so important that we also reflect on ourselves. For example, regional and local level work is very difficult for anyone, including civil society. I mean, as I said in my introduction, that's like one of my big failings. I feel like even though we have amazing partnerships in the region, we're not able to work cohesively, especially in Asia Pacific with time zones. You all know during the forum, we try so hard to be inclusive, and even leading up to the forum, all the consultations we do, it's not an easy task, but we don't throw it out because it's not easy. We don't say, well, it's impossible, so we're not going to do it. So I wanted to just reflect, and that's not part of the program or the script. And I want to thank you for taking the time, both with your organization and yourself, to presenting. Well, now we're going to see our reports. You know, looks like the SG has a consultant to tell us what to do with gender. Oh, speaking of gender, that was my second point. That whole idea of gender equality, sorry, I was about to introduce you. To me, that's ridiculous. It reminded me of the first time I went to Yerevan, Armenia. I was representing ARS at NGO CSW, and I sat down with a minister who, they were still in transition. So it's post-Soviet country, right? And I'm telling him about gender equality and feminists. And, you know, I represent Armenians at the UN, and I'm so proud of myself. He goes, you know, we don't have the word gender in our vocabulary. The Russians never gave us that. And I thought, and that's like what, 10, 12 years ago? And we all also know, listening to member states, how they're trying to, anyway, repeal that. So I just wanted to say that, yeah, we need to really be aware of how easily we can sometimes give in to pushbacks because, well, if we can get this much, we can then give, you know, yeah. Anyway, so now we're going to hear about our consultants and what they came up with and what their recommendations are for NGO CSW. And as you all know, this has been an open and transparent process. We put it out for anybody to be interviewed, and Joanne can tell you a little bit about that. But this meeting specifically, we wanted to go into breakout sessions and share it with you all so that you all feel like part of the decision-making that the new executive committee will do in how we proceed with NGO CSW. So Joanne and Ayushi will be online, right? Your partner. And the floor is yours. I'm done. Yeah.
Is Ayushi there, Kevin? Okay, thank you. Sorry, take your water? Yeah. Okay. Well, it is a total privilege to be here, and we're so excited to come to this phase of our convening of conversations. I want to start, first of all, by thanking Corey and Ivy and Devin and the whole executive committee and all of the people we interviewed and talked to do this. It's not really a review, it was really a convening of conversations about the future of NGO CSW. And so it was a huge privilege for us both to hear from people, but also to learn in this process. I don't think it's always clear what a miracle you are all sitting on and what incredible work you are all doing. So a huge thanks to you for everything. Ayushi, you're there. So just to tell you, maybe Devin to go to the first page, that what we were trying to do, given the exponential growth in NGO CSW and the exponential growth in interest in participating. So it's ironic when you think about it, as Foteni said, that while in the UN, there is kind of this subtle move to question the robustness of gender equality. On the NGO side, there is just this outburst of energy to participate. So we really need to get together. So Gender at Work, Ayushi and I, on behalf of Gender at Work, undertook this inquiry, which was about really pausing for a moment as there are changes at NGO CSW to rethink, reimagine, how can NGO CSW meet this moment of demand? If you could go to the next one, Devin. And so what we were guided by was what we call a framing question, right? What would it take for NGO CSW to affirm and expand? Can you get the thing out so I can actually, right. To transform and expand, yeah. Sorry, to transform and expand its capacity, sustainably support and galvanize commitment and connection of the thousands and thousands and thousands of activists from around the world. And so we were really driven as we had these conversations, and I hope many of you, or some of you at least, have participated by this question of relevance and impact. So many people, so many women around the world are spending so much precious time and money on this. How is it relevant, and what impact does it have to the ongoing work that they do, that we do, to advance gender equality and women's rights in the countries and communities in which they live? That's what this whole review is driven by. And so I'm going to now turn to Ayushi to present the first part, and then I'll come back for the second. Ayushi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanne. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Ayushi is in Barcelona.
Let's figure it out. Take your time. No pressure.
Should I continue?
I know, it's so new.
Sorry, folks, it looks like the in-person space is having technical troubles. That's a nice one to have, no? The in-person space with the troubles.
Okay, Ayushi, go ahead.
Should I continue, Devin?
Ayushi, go ahead.
Shall I start? Continue? Okay. Thanks, Jane. I hope folks can hear me now. Joanne, if you can, maybe raise your hand because I see you. Perfect. Again, hi folks, my name is Ayushi and I'm an Indian based in Barcelona, and I, with Joanne, work with Gender at Work, and it's been such a pleasure and an honor to do this process. Just so you know, we'll rush through the slides slightly faster than we would actually like to. That's only because we want to make sure that we have time for conversations later on. Next slide, please, Devin. Thank you. So during the process, we spoke to over 103 individuals, and we're continuing having some conversations. I recognize some names and faces on this Zoom call as well. People have been from across civil society organizations, member states, the UN, global NGO CSWs, NGO CSW New York, UN Women Philanthropies, and like I said before, government representatives. Next slide, please, Devin. In the next few slides, I'm going to try and summarize some of the key points of what we heard. One voice that largely came across from all our conversations is that just what an amazing space NGO CSW is. It's the largest, most significant and representative annual regular gathering of gender equality advocates. It's huge. For the last few years, it was online, but it's now grown to be a hybrid event with over 50,000 people, and it accommodates all different interests of its attendees, influencing policies, creating space for NGOs, networking, learning, amplifying voices of feminists and women's rights activists across the world. Apologies again if I'm being very fast. Next slide, please, Devin. Actually, please, could you skip to one more slide? Thank you. I won't go through all these quotes, but there are a couple that I'd like to bring folks' attention to. One that stuck for us is, CSW is what's happened, and NGO Forum is what's going to happen. If you're at the NGO Forum, you see the future. That's a very, very powerful one about just the many wonders of NGO CSW. Next slide, please, Devin. In this very important one that I'm going to read out loud is that there are difficulties in accessing formal spaces and advancing the issues. So the parallel process has to navigate that exclusion. It has expanded to put pressure on what has happened internally and giving space from outside for people to come together to network. And there's been this creating an alternative space even when people can't influence the internal government processes. So these are some of the things that we try to encapsulate about what we heard about NGO CSW. What I'd love to talk about is, what came across as, next slide, please, Devin, as the key building blocks for just stronger future actions. We identified 6. One is reach. And that is just a normal potential of, the reach of NGO CSW and all of us here at this meeting and beyond to influence policy, to influence gender equality change. The other is the close relationships and just partnerships that, NGO CSW and the folks in this meeting have fostered with UN Women. The third one, which is very strongly standing out, particularly today, is just NGO CSW's relationship. The direct quote is that with Huri and the leadership team, things have moved a lot further. Next slide, please, Devin. The fourth is just around strengthening connections with member states. Regional interests around, just the ability to, in the possibilities of working cross-regionally and, doing cross-regional fertilization. Next slide, please, Devin. In the next couple of slides, what we want to focus on, and that's part of what we'll get to in the breakout rooms, are the challenges that we're trying to address. Some of them are within NGO CSW's capacity to affect and manage, and some of them are outside it. One thing that really stood out was that CSW as a whole organism can be overwhelming. There are too many panels, too many conference planning, not sure of who's responsible for what. There's an exploitation of women's laborers. The teams within NGO CSW are doing unpaid women's work and unpaid care work. Language and technology, as we know, is a big challenge, how to make things really hybrid and not just a streaming event that takes a lot of technological prowess, access, monies, coalitions for action, that we should be more organized as regional feminist movements before and after CSW. That's one thing that really, really came up. And one big thing that also came up was just healing. Many come to CSW, they're dealing with trauma, exhaustion, overwhelm, jet lag. How can we create ongoing healing spaces within CSW just when we're there for the 2 weeks and before and after? Next slide, please, Devin. I think I have a couple more minutes. So then there are the things that are outside of NGO CSW's capacity to manage and affect, is what came out in our conversations, our individual and focus group conversations, is that an anti-feminist sense of have and have not. There are the parallel events, the side events, and the actual conversations. Those inside the UN with ECOSOC accreditation are better attended and resourced. That's where you get heard. There's a sense of hierarchy that people have observed that gets created within civil society. Folks have noticed that it can be performative. Panels are places to showcase to donors, creates tension between women's and feminist groups. This is a quote, a direct quote from one of our interviewees. There's global backlash that we know that's increasing against women's rights. A serious sense of deterioration of multilateralism and the fixedness of the CSW agenda. It gets set too far ahead in advance. There's limited space for CSOs and just old-fashioned methods of working and the agreed conclusion processes we know. And the final one is a lack of follow-up from UN on the ground. And we're going to come to talk about some of these at the end during our breakout groups. The last slide, please, Joanne. Devin, thank you. we were also very conscious of speaking to youth organizers and activists. They mentioned that the youth forum, it was hard to be at NGO CSW. It was difficult. Sorry, see, there's an interpretation problem. Oh, sorry, Alison, thank you for your comment. I'll get to everyone's comments in a minute. So there were different senses from the youth groups that we have already showcased before, but just putting these there for folks to read quickly while Joanne comes. Thank you so much. And again, apologies for just skirting through.
Unmute myself. Okay. Uh-oh, now I hear two of myself. Okay, good. Ayushi, we gave you a round of applause. I don't know if you heard that. Okay, so we have to go back to the next slide, sorry. Okay, so as Ayushi said, we're actually still in the process of talking to people. So we're still getting other ideas, and we got so many ideas. People have so many creative ideas about what could happen, again, to increase impact and relevance on the ground, which was why Ayushi's last point about follow-up by the UN on the ground and actually in the preparatory process, right, could really make a huge difference in the relevance and impact of NGO CSW and the whole CSW process. And as Ayushi said, the amazing thing about NGO CSW is how it responds to so many different interests. And one thing that came up over and over again in our conversations was, yes, there are people who come to influence agreed conclusions, the intergovernmental process, staying up till 4 a.m., sometimes 6 a.m. to influence the agreed conclusions. And then what happens to the agreed conclusions, right? And this has been discussed now for years and years, right? What are we going to do about it? Outside of NGO CSW's ability to control, but certainly within NGO CSW's ability to influence. And so what Ayushi and I did preliminarily was try to sift through all the amazing ideas that come up, and then to identify kind of 5 or 6 areas of change, we're calling theories of change, where NGO CSW might consider strengthening, changing, adapting. Okay, these are very preliminary. Just so you know, we're going to continue to work with these. We're going to continue to work with the executive committee.
And today.
Absolutely. Well, that's exactly what we hope is, don't be too influenced by these, right? Because these are just some ideas. It would be great to know which resonate, but also what other ideas you have for addressing some of the challenges and opportunities. So we thought, first of all, there is a desire for increased influence on the development negotiations and follow-up to the agreed conclusions, as problematic as they are, right? How can they change to be more relevant? And so some of the things we thought was that it's obviously crucial for NGO CSW to build on the amazing work it's already doing to strengthen its regional presences, so that there are levers in countries and in regions to get involved in both the drafting, the 0 drafts of agreed conclusions, and then what happens afterwards, as well as stronger partnership with UN Women, monitor and tracking the impact of NGO CSW support, and increasing your overall capacity to mobilize CSO input into the expert groups that happen before CSW that feed into the development of a 0 draft of the agreed conclusions. There's a whole official process. How is NGO CSW influencing that process? How can it strengthen? Next one, please, Devin. Okay, the other thing is the capacity of NGO CSW to create in-person spaces. Obviously, we heard a lot of ideas about how people would like to experience their 2 weeks here, right? And one of the things that came up over and over and over again is, rather than have workshops by everybody, could NGO CSW match up organizations that are proposing similar workshops to work together, which would reduce the overall number and also create tracks? again, you know this, I know we're not telling you anything new. So many people talked about how they come, they're overwhelmed, as Ayushi said, and they feel so much responsibility to go home with something, right? And they're wondering, am I going to the right workshops? Am I following the right tracks? So how can we reduce that anxiety level that people feel and help people choose where they want to be? And then obviously more informal networking spaces. As Ayushi said, there was a lot of talk about trauma and harassment that happens, especially for young people across the street, right? So can NGO CSW create healing spaces? Can NGO CSW create more informal networking spaces for spontaneous meetings? And then this proposal of collective voice. How do you marshal the collective voice of everybody who's here? And one proposal was, I don't know how many of you have ever been to the AWID conference, but they have plenaries throughout the system, which enables collective voice to happen. Is it possible for NGO CSW to identify those spaces where there can be those plenaries and more collective voice? Next one, please. Of course, again, as Ayushi said, the online space is becoming more and more important and an incredible way to participate without leaving home. So how do you make this more than a streaming event? How does a hybrid event become truly interactive so that whether you're here or in Botswana or in Nepal, you are fully participating in what happens? Now that is a huge challenge, right? That is a huge challenge, right? A 21st century online platform is crucial. Redefining what hybrid means. And then there was also these ideas of ongoing CSW academies. One of the things that Ayushi identified, and again, you know, is that CSW looks different to everybody, depending on what part you participate in. And it's very hard to get a big picture. It's very hard to understand, what am I coming for? What, you know, what, so is there a way to continue to build capacity? We know, for instance, that you do an amazing orientation, right? A lot of people don't go to the orientation. A lot of people who are here don't go to the orientation. They don't read the material. So how it's a challenge. Again, many ideas about how to answer it. Okay. The next one, Devin, thank you. Then we also thought, well, so, you know, another thing that comes up, and Ayushi mentioned it, is this notion of a class system within CSOs, depending on who's accredited, who's not, who has money, who doesn't, who understands the system, who doesn't. And so outside of NGO CSW's ability to control, this is the result of an entrenched intergovernmental and bureaucratic patriarchal process, right? And so what can NGO CSW do about that? And so ideas about how do you forge even a stronger relationship with the Bureau and UN Women. You've already made such amazing strides on that. What else can you do? How do you collaborate with the Bureau to really get innovative ideas about participation out there? And also a mechanism for real-time complaints about what happens, not only across the street. We heard so many times, you know, young women in particular, but not just young women, saying, certain things happened to me. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know who to go to, et cetera, et cetera. So how can we do that? And then this call that has been echoing for years about rotating CSW out of New York so that others have greater access. How can NGO CSW amplify that call, ground that call, et cetera? Next one, which I think is the last one. Oh, this is just when we were talking to one of the member states. I think there is definitely interest among member states to work with NGO CSW to ease some of these problems, right? How can you work more on visas, more effectively on visas, on the long lines for registration, et cetera, et cetera. So where is that partnership to actually address some of the fundamental logistical challenges that gender equality advocates face when they come to New York and even virtually? And last one was about, next slide, Devin, yeah. The young activists who come. This is absolutely crucial to continuing a vibrant movement. And so some of the ideas that came out were, first of all, a multi-stakeholder process of developing a 3 to 5 year youth engagement strategy, right? So what is NGO CSW's long-term strategy for sustaining youth engagement. A youth leadership council, paid youth representatives attached to every regional hub. This is a little controversial, but a proposal. And then also more scholarships, more aid, more ways of getting young activists here. And I'm going to stop there. Those are just hopefully you got a sense of what we heard, and what we heard led directly to these ideas. As we say, there are many, many more. And so I'm going to turn it back over to, I'm not sure who, to task the small
breakout
groups.
sessions.
Yes.
We're running a little behind, so we're gonna do breakout sessions shorter.
Okay.
If you wanna tell people to just be very clear and, you know.
So you want me to task the breakout sessions? I'm
well,
happy to
she's
do.
Doing the breakout sessions. And I think while she's doing the online breakout sessions, I recommend we go into 4 breakout sessions here. So one group will be where Victoria is in that corner. You can push some chairs back that way. One group will be where Ivy and Susan is right here. You can push chairs that way. Another group would be where Ellen is. And then you can move the chairs around and go into a group.
But so Hori,
Okay.
Hori,
Yes.
before you move people, let's describe what we have to do.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So before you go into your groups, how long will we have?
20 minutes.
20 minutes in groups. And what we want you to come back with are any comments on the findings, on what we found, and B, any thoughts about concrete actions, right? What did you hear from the presentation that aligned with what you think? What didn't align? And what other ideas do you have? Okay, so if each group could choose a facilitator and then someone to
Well,
report back?
there's
Oh, right,
PC
there's a facilitator.
PC member
Right.
will be your facilitator.
And will they report back? Okay, cool. Okay, so 20 minutes to discuss that, and thank you so much. Huh? In person what? Oh, I see. Yes. And Ayushi, can you hear us? Because I think we're hoping that you'll do the online. How many people were online?
How many
100
groups?
something? Holy moly. So should we do online first?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ayushi?
Yeah, I can hear you.
2 minutes each.
Ay, ay, ay.
Let's start with the 10 groups.
Okay, everybody, if we could listen to
We have
our
30 minutes.
online colleagues, people who are online, and can we have report backs, quick report backs? We're so sorry that you have to truncate your report backs, but we really want to hear from everybody. And so I don't know if you have numbers, Devin, can you call on groups one at a time?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Devin.
Does Ayushi want to do it or should
I-
I do have to. Okay, just 1 through 10, because I kind of would have to say it.
1 through 10, they know their numbers?
Okay.
Okay, so group 1, could we have your 1-minute report back?
And then just mute yourself.
Group 1. Do folks know which groups they were in?
Okay.
talking, but we can't hear.
No, I don't know which number my group was.
Devin, we're gonna need a little bit of assistance here. Can you give us the names of a couple of people from each group?
Yes, so group 1 was Allison Kelly, Beth Blissman, Jillian, etc.
Okay, so I guess it's on me to speak. So everyone, my group had 9 folk in it, and we're happy to report the following. On what aligned and did not align, we were largely in agreement with what was presented. In terms of ideas for the future, we have 3 which we'd like to share. One is a larger inclusion of men and boys, women and girls, and all their diversity. We thought the plenary sessions were a good idea, and maybe there could be some more thought put around that. And the third was there was an agreement about feeling overwhelmed, and maybe parallel events could be reviewed in how they were set up in terms of potentially grouped via thematic session or geographical regions to ensure that there was more participation and easier on those attending. So under a minute, as committed, Ayushi, back to you.
Thank you, Jillian. Rosa, your group.
Great, thank you so much. My group had presented issues about inclusion, so I'm just going to group them together. Inclusions for people with disability, so ways in which there could be more inclusion about that. Also for more dedicated youth spaces, so inclusion around adolescent girls and youth spaces, and also for grassroots women. One issue was the issue of financing, how many of the same people go every year because they have financing, but for grassroots women, it's not an option. Other issues related to the hybrid format, which in my group, some folks expressed that it's an improvement, they like it. The option to meet in person should also be retained, but there's a lot of convenience in having the hybrid format so that you're able to dip into a lot of sessions, not have to be on the ground going building to building, which is not very productive. And also there was the issue of trying to link with the work of the SDGs and how that might need to be looked at, but how that might be an area for connection, greater connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa.
Sorry, if I may ask,
yes.
add Rosa. Someone also said that recording of sessions, such that if you cannot meet up with certain time, like if you want to maybe attend like 5 different activities, but you're only able to attend 2, and then you want to go back later to listen to what has happened in the other sessions. So like when it is in the hybrid form, recording of these sessions, such that we can always go back to see what has happened in other sessions we're not able to attend.
Thank
Okay,
you,
and
Rita.
that was the, yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Rita. And Rosa, Ivy, to your group now. And while we find Ivy, perhaps Terry, to yours.
Sure, thank you. So my group had about 8 people within it, and can you all hear me okay? Right,
Yeah.
and so overall, I believe that what was presented was seemed to align quite well with the folks in the room. There were some concerns that were raised. So around some of the things that resonated were like the regional meeting. There was consensus there. They see the value in that. There's a lot of consensus around the numbers of events, and so maybe the idea of grouping like events, so to allow for either better tracking of those events so people can get around easier, or so that you don't have as many of similar events, was also was raised as a potential solution to addressing that. One thing that came out was the creating strong leaders out of the various diverse groups of participants. And so not particularly to create, but not to create an elitist group of people, but to create leaders that can step in, and representation. So leadership and representation, they kind of went hand in hand with this comment, so that those leaders from the various groups can be participating and representing those groups of individuals. Another thing that came out was just recognizing and valuing where the NGO CSW has come from, all of the efforts and steps that were made along the way to get for NGO CSW to get to where it currently is. So, so the idea was to continue to value that journey and take comfort in it, but also extract the lessons from it going forward. Vienna Cafe was something else that came up. They saw the value in that, and having more civil society participation in that process as a way for civil society to have that direct exchange with member states. So opening that up for advocacy for civil society to be able to advocate directly to member states was something that came out. And the last comment that I noted was mentoring with as a suggestion, because another comment that was made was guarding against or finding a way to ensure that participants, particularly first-time participants, are prepared for NGO CSW. The comments are that too many people attend NGO CSW having had no experience with it before, in spite of the myriad of information that's put out there by NGO CSW, they do not review the materials, they don't review the videos, they don't read the materials, and so they come to the CSWs unprepared. So the idea was, if you are coming for the first time, that it is mandatory that you at least review the videos on registration, so that you have some sense of what the CSW is prior to being on the ground. And then one recommendation was to mentor, to align new people with to be mentored with someone who had been through CSW before. And when those people return, of course, there's a reporting out process that highlights what they would have gained from the experience. And that's it. There was a lot of good discussion in this group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Louisa, to you. And so sorry, just a kind reminder, you have like a minute and a half.
Thanks, Aisha. I'll try my best to concentrate everything in 1 minute. So on the first question, there was a discussion about the expectations that people who are based in New York have and those who come from outside New York. So not necessarily the same expectations, but trying to take into account the expectations of those who are not in New York. It was an important point. The issue of being overwhelmed, it's as others have already said, there's a lot going on. It's difficult to follow, and sometimes certain activities are overlapping. So it is a concern, and how this also creates some kind of disconnect among constituencies, young people, people with disabilities, and other constituencies. So that's a concern also. A question about confusion with the hybrid model. Perhaps there could be a room for being more intentional about clarifying, gaps in terms of how to navigate. So the portions that are in person and the portions that are virtual, but overall very many welcome the fact that there was a discussion about the hybrid and the virtual, and how these portions should be maintained into the future, because it allows for those who are not based in New York to engage, particularly those who face barriers in terms of coming to New York. A lot of discussion about youth participation and youth engagement, including young adults who not always can engage because they are either finalizing their studies or already working. So there was a question about that, and about continuing the engagement of young people, building their capacity to engage fully with the NGO forum and with CSW overall was an issue, and perhaps thinking about having a portion of the capacity building contents from NGO CSW specifically designed around young people and their participation. And I think there were a couple more issues. And the final point, which was a very important question, is the virtuality is not going to go away. We need to accept that as a fact. So in that regard, we need to devise new and more attractive interactive means so that we all engage around CSW, about the NGO forum, and just to use this also to ensure that young people engage more meaningfully in the NGO forum and CSW in general. So I think that's it from my part. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that, Louisa. Embrace the virtuality. I like that. Susan, maybe I could ask you to report back for our group.
Sure, thank you. Our group, most of the things that have been discussed, I won't repeat, but I just want to say that specifically we resonated with the aspect of moving the meetings to different regions to enable grassroots people and people who face barriers of visas, costs, to be able also to take part. And also the issue of youth engagement and their participation in the CSW meetings. Some of the suggestions we came up with is, of course, the issue of overwhelm is kind of running in other groups. One of the suggestions was to maybe have people work hand in hand to combine similar topics so that, because everyone wants to take something home. And when you find you are overwhelmed by choices, it's really hard to be able to see, what do I do now? And then one of the other suggestions was having, because the language of the zero draft is very cumbersome. It's not, not everyone is able to read it and analyze it. And women are being asked to contribute or to say something and they don't understand it. So probably have some training and help, and maybe also instead of using just the language, but have some pictures or something that is easily understandable for people. And the other one was also focusing on negotiating between the UN and the UN women and CSW
Right.
to come up with topics that that are not too broad.
Hello. Oh, wait.
Hi, Hooray, we hear you now.
Okay. And you can unmute
Sorry?
that. Okay. Sorry, I really apologize. I'm looking at the time and we definitely have a hard stop at 3. And here's what I'm going to suggest. Everybody knows who was the leader of their group. Please send us the notes. I was going to ask you to do that anyway, because even though we're taking notes right now.
Turn the video on.
Start my
Video on.
All right, here we are. But you could hear me. So what I'm saying is that I'm sorry we couldn't go through all the groups. There's so much information. There's a lot of repetition of the same things, but it's so important that each group sends us your notes, because all of that is going to go to Joanne and Ayushi. And we have our retreat next Friday. It's going to be addressed along with all the other information. So I apologize for anybody who didn't report back. Send it to either info@ngocsw.org. That's the easiest way. Or you can just send it to me, hootie@ngocsw.org. And then I can forward it to the right people. So again, please send everything, even though it's going to be repetition, because then we'll see how many things were repeated, like youth and all of that stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Hori. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ayushi. Thank you for staying up late, Ayushi.
That's right. And as I said before, we do have a hard stop at 3 o'clock, but I'm hanging out, so we can just hang out and talk after 3 o'clock. I'm not rushing people away, but I do want to consider the time and say that we have to officially hand over leadership right now. So I want to thank you again. Just like I said earlier in my presentation, I could not have done this without you all. I mean, that's very clear. I want to especially thank my partner in crime from day one. Before I became chair, Devin was my intern, and then we hired her as office manager, and our growth is due to her perseverance, her intelligence, her dedication. I also, you could see today, right? I also want to especially thank my Vice Chair Ivy. Because of the model we created, we were literally like co-chairs. And that's why we're going forward with the co-chair model, because I could not have done it. Even just CCing her in an email was empowering to me, because I knew I had a partner there that was going to confirm the craziest ideas I came up with. But not only that, I want to now say the EC, the outgoing EC, starting with our ex officio, Susan O'Malley. I would not be here if it wasn't her pushing me to be chair. I cursed her out a few times. Can't say that publicly. I can't say that publicly, but I thank you. I thank you for believing in me. I thank you for pushing me to do this. And of course, the full EC. I had the best time with you all. We did some incredible work together. And this is gonna be really good memories for me. And of course, I'll be ex officio, so you're not getting rid of me completely. I'll still be nudging you all along. Now I wanna give the floor. I was going to give the floor to both co-chairs, Ivy and Pamela, but Pamela's from home. I don't know if she's gonna be online. Then I will have Ivy representing both of you. Thank you so much, Ivy, for taking the leadership. Official. Thank you so much.
So yeah, so my regrets from Pamela. She's home with, and she said it's okay for me to say that, you know, she's positive with COVID. Otherwise, she would have never missed such an meeting as today. But I wrote everything down. This is like our address, make it official. So yeah, speaking for both of us, we really want to build on the great work of the last 4 years, but we also want to, you know, push NGO CSW New York to new heights. And I think, I mean, Hudi acknowledged the executive committee, the new executive committee as well. We haven't actually named them. You know, you've seen the list and they're actually here in the room as well. So I thought I could actually have them stand up. If you're here. The new EC, you know who you are. And, yeah, but also the current EC that's continuing on can also, you know, this is the new EC. So like Safira, Rahel, yeah, Rosemary, all of us together. Okay. And who's not, you know, Rosa and Louisa. And, oh, Rosa, she came back, yay. She's vice chair. So yes, she is vice chair. And so actually the executive committee is holding a retreat next Friday. And so there's not that much we can go into detail about, you know, the future plans of the committee. So you have to stay tuned, you know, till September, and then we'll give you like a lot more of a plan of what we're going to do. That said, we are going to continue with this transparent, you know, collaborative shared leadership model that was started by Hudi, and we are optimistic that we're going to keep growing in our current trajectory. You know, and this is all due to the efforts of, you know, Hudi's leadership, and then Devin, the interns, and the executive committee. And I'd like to also like really take the time to thank them for their dedication and the great service that they made, you know, to the UN community, and also to the past chairs of the last 51 years of the committee's history. We just keep building on, right? And we're deeply indebted to all of them, each of them. And please be patient with us. Pamela and I, with the new executive committee, are embarking on a new experiment. Once again, for the first time in the committee's history, we have instituted a co-chair structure. And we'll do our best in this transition. But we know that we have a supportive community, and that's the members and all of you, and who continue to show up at our monthly meetings. And we know we'll be okay because of you. So thank you in advance for your encouragement. And we have signed up as co-chairs with a belief in the potential of the feminist and women's movement. And in solidarity, we can contribute to making gender equality a reality despite the pushbacks. And we hope that we have hope for the advocacy and action of civil society to move member states and the world in the direction of our dreams, and for realizing human rights of women and girls and all their diversity. So this second part actually is my personal, me speaking currently as vice chair about Hudi. I want to embarrass her. So I had to take this time because we do have some time. So I really want to express my appreciation for her tireless and heart-filled efforts for this committee. really pouring her life, I would say almost sacrificing it for the last 4 years. So Hootie and I met actually soon after I joined the committee in 2013. So it's been 10 years. And she pulled me into the young professionals group at that time. And in 2014, Soon Young, who was the chair, invited me as a member at large. And that was the start of me with the executive committee. And it's been such a pleasure to work under Soon Young and then Susan, who's here in the room too, and now Hootie's leadership. And so you can say that Hootie is the reason why I've stuck with this committee and have really, really gotten involved. And I think most of you know her for her hard work. I mean, any of you who've heard her speak or, know how open and inviting she is. And her welcoming and warm personality really makes it hard to resist her. She's truly a people connector, one who builds relationships with anyone willing and even persists with the ones who are not so willing. The accomplishments over the two terms as chair through COVID and the virtual then hybrid forum attest to all of this. She's fearless in the face of any obstacles, seeker of challenges. She's a problem solver and action oriented. And I have been impressed by Hootie's ability to acknowledge people, to listen and respond thoughtfully to requests or comments, either by email, chat, or during a meeting, no matter what that comment is. She will respond. I think this made for an environment where everyone felt heard. I thought that was so important. It's been very fun working closely with her. And without her encouragement and support, which I have been assured, and she just said it again, she's going to continue to support as ex officio. I know I can continue to persevere. She's kept me by her side the whole time and really lived by her words of shared leadership. And she shared decision-making with me, and I have learned so much. So I'm excited for what you've built, Hootie, and I'm determined not to let you down. So thank you for always being your authentic self and daring to be vulnerable. And you have infused us with energy and have carried out your leadership with kindness. And now I look forward to the new adventures with Pamela and the new executive committee, and who I respect and admire each of them. And so thank you. Enjoy your summer and see you in September. That's it.
Thank you.
Just
today. Okay. I have it in recording, so if she ever says anything, all right, it's officially over. We can shut our, well, we can just hang out. Now you can talk. And I'm not gonna shut you.
Okay, so is the meeting officially over? Can someone close the meeting?
We want to hear report backs from the room if y'all are still there, although it sounds like they've descended into